Native Americans in Hawaii. A lot of people don't think about that.
Right.
I think the only thing people think about it, and not a people, well, Iroquois Point, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Do you have any background, or do you have any knowledge of how Native Americans, or what was was there a relationship with Native Hawaiians? How did it all start?
That's a great question. Since I moved here in 2017, I've interacted with Native Americans that have lived here on the island, or are half Hawaiian, half Native American. Over time, I've heard different stories. One story that I heard was that there were several Native Hawaiians that went to work on the railroad on the West Coast, especially in Washington. One family I know, that's a story they shared with me. And so then while the men were there, they met some Native American ladies and, began a relationship and a family. Yeah.
As natives do.
Right, exactly. You seek each other out, something familiar. And so it was an elder lady. We went to Mary Monarch in 2018. And I brought my mother over from Arizona to experience that with me, and it was just the two of us. And she sat right next to this Native Hawaiian lady that goes every year, and she was making lei and wristlets the whole time that it was going on. And she's the one that shared that family story. That when it was time for her grandfather to come back, he didn't want to leave his Native American wife, so he brought her over. Yeah. And so, I've heard kind of similar stories like that, and then, of course, the whole military, experience when they go to other lands, same thing with Native American men. When they've traveled to foreign lands, they met and married women from that area. So that's what I understand. Native
American. So if you're joining us, I'm humbled to sit with Dr. Lynnae Lawrence, Native American. So we're talking Native American culture, of course, in Hawaii as well. So before we continue on, as we are cultured people, so according to the CDC, this is now how I have to present a lei to you. So mahalo for being here. Mahalo for taking time. Where did you grow up? Where on the continent did you grow up?
So my father was in the Air Force, and so I have 5 brothers, and so we basically were Air Force brats. I'm towards the end of the line, and so my older brother spent 18 years as an Air Force brat. I spent about 7 years as an maybe 10 years as an Air Force brat. And my father was stationed in Guam at the time. And so when he retired, we moved back to my mother's reservation in Arizona, the Hopi Reservation. My mother's Hopi. And my father is a Assiniboine or Nakota from Montana, one of the Northern Plains people. And so we spent most of our years growing up in Arizona. And my father would take us back to Montana on summers. We'd always go back to his home, which is in Lodgepole, Montana, and so we grew up knowing both cultures that way.
It's always interesting to me. So, tribes-wise, on the continent of America, how many are there? I've heard 53. I've heard hundreds. How many roughly are there?
So the last number I heard, was 574. Yeah, and then there's also tribes or nations, Native nations that are recognized within the state. So I know that there's a lot of them back on the East Coast that are recognized by the state but not federally recognized. So
that's weird.
Yeah, there's 574 federally recognized Native nations, but there's more than that are unrecognized.
Is there
federally.
A reason for that? But it just the federal government's like, yeah, we recognize them, and the state's like, no, we don't.
Yeah. I know that one of the most recently federally recognized, they're very well recognized by their neighbors, their neighbor nations, Native nations. and we've known about them forever. They carry on their cultural ways, but because back in the day their leader did not sign a treaty with the federal government, they were unrecognized for all those years. And so they can trace their lineage back to a lot of the federally recognized Native nations, but they never went to full federal recognition. And so then afterwards they really had to fight hard to get that recognition. And that's a tribe that's a tribe that's in Montana.
Wow. So when you grew up, so Arizona, and when you would go to your grandfather's nation, was it a big difference? Did within you go to another, where'd you go, Montana? Now the people in Montana, did they look at you guys from Arizona and be like, you guys? Because they were always a warring nation, right? It's kind of like, how in old Hawaii, different islands were different nations and different chiefs, and they just didn't like each other.
Right.
We're sitting with Dr. Lynnae Lawrence right now. We're talking Native American culture and history. That's prevalent in Hawaii.
Yeah. So that's funny, and I laugh because if you think about the Northern Plains tribes, they're very tall. And if you know anything about the Hopi Nation, we're very small. And so, my mother being Hopi, she's maybe 5 foot. And my father, he didn't take after, a lot of his relatives. He's, he wasn't quite 6 foot. But I'm 5'5", and so for a Hopi, that's tall. For a Nakota, that's short. So
hold that thought. I want to get right into the differences in tribes and nations right here on Culturized. Bringing you what matters. Viewers can receive the Star Advertiser digital full access subscription for just $9.95 per month. Go to staradvertiser.com and click on subscribe. Use the code AHITHING. Aloha Termite and Pest Control, your local and leading pest and termite control solution in the state, always providing you superior service with Aloha. Now, physically, we're talking Native Americans, so Hopis are smaller.
Yep.
And I always wonder, besides the physicality now, so now, did you go to the summers to Montana, or was it the winters? Because I'm thinking to myself, who wants to go down?
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, we would go in the summertime, when we were out of school, and my father could throw us all, my father and mother could throw us all in the car, and we'd travel up to Montana.
And getting away from Arizona in the summer is even better.
just to go up and, make sure that we knew our relatives up there and everything.
And did they see you guys differently? Did they treat you differently? How was it?
So I was, I didn't notice as much as my brother did, but there was a time that my father decided he wanted to move back home to the Fort Belknap Reservation. And so we did move back home when I was in junior high, and my brother was older. And of course, coming, from
right.
we were just different, we were raised basically in the Air Force, and then
so
in
even
the Hopi tribe,
part.
right. So he ran into a bit of trouble, because the girls liked him, and and those guys didn't like it. For me, I didn't notice, that we were treated any differently because I interacted.
Comes that good-looking guy. He's here for the winter.
Yeah, I was younger, and I was interacting with our relatives. But I did move back later on too. I took my own family back, and we lived there several years. So.
And do you think it was because, of course, you guys were in the Air Force and you traveled a lot? Did you ever come across this? Because some Hawaiians do it. You're not Native enough.
Yes, definitely on the Hopi side. Because again, we were raised in the Air Force, and it's hard when you have a mother from one nation and a father from a different, they don't speak, number one, the same native tongue. And my mother is fluent in Hopi, and the Hopi are very traditional, very, very traditional. And so when we first moved back, a lot of my cousins would pick on us, and they would, try to say something to me in Hopi that I didn't understand. And so then they would call me, a white girl, basically.
Wow. Isn't it weird? Okay,
yeah.
So I totally agree. And it happens. I think in any Native culture, it happens, because I remember living away on the mainland for a while and going back to Lanai, and friends or people I knew would be like, "You're so howly."
Yeah.
We're the same color.
Exactly.
And so growing up, do you think it was a plus? I mean, I think it's always a plus to grow up in two different nations and two different cultures. Was it for you? Was it a plus for you?
Well, that's who I am. So yes, you know, of course, when it was hurtful initially, because there's a lot of ceremonies that take place on the Hopi and the Hopi villages. And my grandfather was one of our traditional ceremonial leaders for the village. And we, you know, with my cousins and them used to giving us a hard time, and, you know, even other village members, when my brothers would go down, maybe they didn't understand the language, and they all spoke Hopi, you know, in the kivas and stuff, and at the dances and everything. It took a while. We had to learn, but it was definitely hurtful. But the one thing that I always remember is my grandfather used to always really fight for us and anybody, any other child who might live off the reservation, you know, that didn't grow up that way. And I remember him specifically telling us, sitting down one time and telling us during one stressful time that, so the Hopi are matrilineal, okay, and so we get our clans from our mothers. And so he sat us down and he told us, you're Hopi, your mother's Hopi, that makes you Hopi, your mother's Sun Clan, that makes you Sun Clan. Don't let anybody else tell you anything different. And because he was so well respected and so beloved, you know, by us and everybody, after that, I just said, what, you know, and I was in high school at the time.
So grandfather, obviously a big man, right? Because there was.
Well, no, this was on my Hopi side, so he was a smaller.
So he was actually giving. No, I know I'm grandfather, but your grandmother is elder. So and that's what I also love about Native American culture is a lot of respect goes to elders. Right, just like Native Hawaiians, so much respect goes to elders. When you grew up, were you raised more by your grandparents or by your parents?
So we were raised by our parents, but because my mother got us involved in our culture, we were always around my grandparents. So we were always there, and like I said, my grandfather was one of our ceremonial, traditional religious leaders. We always had exposure to that, and my grandmother as well. And in high school, I would go out and spend the summers at the village, the Hopi village, with my grandparents. So yeah.
Was it always hard knowing that your grandfather, he was that authority figure, and you were his granddaughter, and of course the rest of the tribe would listen to him? Did you ever find times you're like, oh, I don't want to listen to you?
No.
Well, when you're by yourself, not because I remember times where I'm just like, you know, my grandparents would say, this is what you do and this is how you do it. I'm just like, oh God. But of course you don't let them see that part,
yeah.
Right?
Well, my grandmother was more the authoritarian than my grandfather, because he was usually a very gentle, quiet man, you know, and so when
that's even more scary.
Right. When he spoke, you know, it was to teach us, you know, not necessarily to discipline us, but my grandmother disciplined us, you know.
Yeah. I love that because they're the soft-spoken ones, you know, you don't want to upset them. But I love it. Every time an elder speaks, it's like I tell people now, every time it doesn't matter what they're saying, there's a lesson in it. I'm surprised today that a lot of people don't understand even basic Native American culture. Reservations, right? How would you explain to somebody who didn't know what reservations were?
So reservations were established by the federal government, not always on traditional homelands of whatever particular Native nation that was. It was mostly a way for the federal government to control the various Native nations and put them on a piece of land and tell them, you know, try to acculturize them to Anglo society, that, you know, you have to farm or you have to, you know, ranch. And
it's such a weird, so they didn't even, the nation didn't even get to pick where their reservation? The federal government's like, no, you're going to go over there.
Pretty much for the most part, you know, sometimes they would have a little say, you know, that these are our traditional homelands, which were really vast, and they might pick, you know, a small little portion that they didn't think that the federal government, you know, needed or was useful to them. So that's how a lot of the reservations were established.
For yourself, of course, you were, as you say, an Air Force brat. Did you always have culture within even living all over, or was there a certain time in your life where you're like, okay, I need to return and make this?
So again, I was pretty young when my father was still in the Air Force, but we always knew we were Native American, always. They never, you know, tried to say you have to try to live like this or that, you know, the larger society that we may have been involved in or living in, we never, you know, and because my mother was very traditional, she was raised traditional, she always made sure that we knew who we were, you know, where we came from.
One tradition that you learned growing up that's prominent that you teach to your kids or anyone else younger in your family, what's one of them? A tradition, like we're talking about Hawaii, we don't whistle at night.
Okay.
When you speak to somebody, because there's a lot of similarities that Native Americans, Native Hawaiians have. Like when we speak, you speak alo ike face to face. You don't talk behind somebody. What are things that we may not know tradition wise? So
yeah, I mean, all the time, every day, you know, my grandkids, I actually have custody of three of my grandsons, 16, 14, and then 7. And so, you know, they always, obviously, they have to address us with respect. You know, you always, they call me So'o, which is grandmother in Hopi, and they call their grandfather, who's Ojibwe, you know, by a traditional Native American name. And so they call their older brothers Vava, which is older brother, and then we always direct them to their younger brothers as Dupko, or their older sister as Gaga. So you have to, you know, when you call them by your relation to them. So, you know, you always remember where you stand in that family.
I always hierarchy, something else Native Hawaiians do. So you're joining us right now on Culturized. If you want to learn something about it, comment down below. If you're watching us on YouTube, this is Culturized. We're talking traditions, and we have a lot of similar traditions. We're just talking about the hierarchy, where you stand, right? My brothers and I, it's funny because up until we would physically fight each other just to reestablish pecking order. I mean, we knew who was older, who was not, but we would just physically try and do it. What are other things that traditionally that you bring in to today in your adult life that you share with your grandkids? Maybe things that not a lot of, or people outside of the Native American culture realize, because a lot of times people think they know Native American culture. Somebody's always 1/8 something, right?
Yeah.
I just had that the other day.
Or 1/64.
1/64. Other traditions that are you would say people would be like, whoa, I didn't know that. Just Native American, or even Hopi for that matter. So hierarchy is one.
Yeah. So. Gosh, so many. I'm just trying to think. You know, well, for on our Assiniboine side, we dance a lot. You know, but even on the Hopi side, we dance. And so, again, speaking on the Hopi side, we have clans, and there's certain rules. You know that you can't. One thing you can't do, like you can't marry the same clan as you. So. You know, we try to make sure that we would love to have our grandsons meet and marry a Hopi lady, because, you know, their blood is getting thinner. So we always make sure that they know, you know, oh, what clan. The first thing you ask is when you're introducing yourself to another Hopi person, that's always something that you identify right off the bat, because that could also mean if they're the same Sun clan, or if they're the same clan as you, that would be your relative, your brother or your sister. So
explain that. So there's nations, there's tribes, there's clans. Is that how it goes? What?
So within the Hopi tribe, yes, they're clans. On my Assiniboine side, they don't have clans necessarily; they have bands. And so, you know, different bands. So within like the Nakota Nation, they would have different leaders, and so certain people would follow that particular leader, and then that would form one band. Whereas with clans, it's based on your mother. So we're a matrilineal society. So we get our clan from our mother. And so same thing with my grandsons now, because they're children of my daughter, they're also the same clan as we are.
Sense.
So they're Sun clan as well.
Because I do a lot of conferences and conventions with natives. Got one coming up, but I always hear those terms. You know, it's the nation. I come from this nation and this tribe and this clan and this band, and I could never figure out. So clan is just familial.
Yes.
Usually.
Yes.
And then the tribe is, and then they makes sense.
So I guess if you think about it, it's like you get your surname from your father, but with the Hopi tribe, we get our clan from our mother.
Wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So it's like, nope, sorry, that's the name you're getting. Right?
Right.
With this, so now that you're in Hawaii, have you seen? Is there a big Native American population in Hawaii that you know?
You know, there's a core group that I have come to know very well and very close to, and but within that core group, I've been told that there's 10,000 Native Americans in Hawaii, and I'm like, where are they? You know, because I don't, you know, I don't see. I think a lot, obviously, in the military that come and go, because within the last couple of years, there have been people that have reached out and said, hey, my nephew's there, or hey, you know, my daughter's there. And we have, because now we have a group called Oahu Native Nations Organization, ONNO, with an extra N.
I like it. Hold that thought. We're talking Native Americans in Hawaii. Yes, you've heard about Iroquois Point, but you've heard there's even powwows in Hawaii, right here on Culturised. Thanks for joining us. Mahalo for joining us. If you're joining us on YouTube, this is the extended version. Any comments, hit a comment down below. Hit the subscribe button. Legitimizes me and validates my existence. We're talking culture. Dr. Lynnae Lawrence, thank you so much for making time and being here. Native American culture, not only in general, but in Hawaii. So 10,000. Apparently, there's 10,000 Native Americans. Do they say specifically what kind, or are they just Native Americans? Just Native Americans in general. Or as, and I'm gonna laugh, or as CNN says, there's something else. Right? But it with that really quick, I have to say though, only natives can take something that was really terrible and just turn it around. So we're talking about Native Americans in Hawaii. The organization is again? Oahu Native Nations Organization. ONNO. ONNO. How brilliant is that? Yeah, it took us a long time to come up with this, but and when you came up with it, did you think, oh, hello? It's right there. Yeah, right? No, there was like 15 minds working on this for, a month or two, trying to come up with our so we're fairly new, but I've been here and I have been the powwow coordinator for the Oahu powwow since 2018 and 2019. Okay, when we're talking powwow, we're not talking about the one when they go around and paint murals. Okay, we're Native American powwow. How long have they been doing powwows? Because I remember going to some like back in the 90s at Magic Island. Yes, so there were actually two groups of Native Americans here on the island that had powwows here, going back that far, from what I understand. And powwow that they have here, I mean, is a true powwow? It's like if you go to a powwow here in Hawaii and you go to a powwow in Arizona, it'll be very similar, or Montana. Yeah. So I can only speak for the years that I've been here and organized a powwow in 2018 and 2019. I've grown up dancing powwow almost all my life since we returned, back to Turtle Island from Guam. So I've been dancing forever, and in my eyes. So when I took over as a powwow coordinator, I made sure that the powwow that was here was representative of the powwows we have back home. And powwow here is I always compare it to, it's like the Merry Monarch of Native American here, right? And your powwow, you have a lot of different nations, a lot of different tribes attending. And there's some that come not only from Hawaii, but outside of Hawaii. Yes. So again, in order to really have a powwow that's representative of those that we have back home, are to have bring over
the best dancers and most recognized. And so that was the first goal that I had. And our head staff, we have a head man dancer, a head lady dancer, we have a invited drum group, and then we'll usually have flag bearers, so and an MC. So I reached out for the best of the best and invited them to come for our powwows the last 2 years.
When growing up, is it you were just groomed to be a dancer, or a singer, or both? Or a drummer? Could you do all?
Well, oh yeah, and they do. Wow. Yeah. So, but sometimes it's a little hard to do both if you're a singer and a dancer. Especially when it's time to dance, or there's a lot of contest dancing that goes on in some of the contest powwows. But there's traditional powwows where there's no contest, but they do exhibitions. So that can take some wind to be able to do both of those.
I was going to say, when you as a dancer, certain ones that you do. Dance-wise?
So I started out as a women's fancy shawl dancer, and I danced that for 20-something years. And then when I started medical school, it was a little hard to remain, competitive and top shape, and so I started dancing a different style called the women's jingle dress.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so now that I'm back in the golden age category, I'm like, hey, I can go back to fancy shawl. So I've gone back to, but I always did fancy shawl in between there. That's my first love.
And did you compete as well?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
You were, as they say, you were on the powwow trail.
Yep.
Explain to us and some people that what exactly is a powwow. The word is thrown around all the time. People use it for their own thing, but what exactly is it? What does it mean? What is it for?
So within Native American culture, there's ceremony, and then there's social dances. Okay, so but there's always some ceremony in our social dances. Okay, but it not necessarily the other way around. Okay, so ceremony always takes place back home on our homelands, in our home villages and communities, whereas social dances also take place there, and they're usually, and one of the most, I think, popular type of social dancing is the powwow dancing, because it's intertribal, so to speak, or so everybody can pretty much participate, and most of those occur again in the summer, where in the home communities where you can dance directly on Mother Earth. But in the winter, they will have some powwows as well. So it's more of a, like I said, a social type of dancing. But again, there's always some ceremonial or traditional aspect of it.
And can they happen whenever, or is there certain times that you have to have them, or?
So generally it is in the summer, and again, according to the different Native nations, like in the winter, kind of like the makahiki, I think,
exactly.
Period of time where everything is kind of quiet, where you don't jump.
We're just gonna chill.
Yeah. Pretty much, you don't necessarily do that, but they do go into different types of dances within the Northern Plain style of dancing. They'll do what they call round dances or roundies, and that's always a lot of fun. So that's kind of the season that we're in right now.
Do you see, so I know there's the powwow trail and the competitors, and there's some amazing dancers. Do you see when it's a social powwow, non-competitive, do you feel there's still competition when people show up and they're in full regalia and they're just like, oh, look. Is this because it's gotta have
maybe well.
So I have a couple of friends that are fancy dancers.
Oh, okay.
And I always on the main, but I always tell them, I said, do you guys walk in and you like look at other ones and go, man, look, oh, I should have did that. Oh, I should. And they're like, so they would say yes, but we don't show it.
Yeah, true that. You got to be cool.
So you guys are doing powwow in Hawaii. When is your powwow?
So because of the pandemic, we haven't set a date for our powwow yet. We're really brainstorming a lot. Plus, we have to fundraise, and one of our main ways to fundraise would be taking part in some of the other events, food events, where we sell Native American tacos and soups, fry bread, man. Native American different soups. So we raised a lot of money that way. But again, with our new organization, we haven't been able to really do that yet. So we're trying to raise money other ways, kind of during the pandemic.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Because I remember, so the last one was when we actually, the last time I seen you was the most amazing thing that was we've had at Ha'ola Village in Waianae, but the calling of the buffalo. And that's a dance that was that ceremonial.
So there's that was a Hopi group that came over, one of our visiting. We do because powwow doesn't represent every Native nation on Turtle Island. What we try to do is we try to bring other nations in to share their style of social dancing, because everybody thinks powwow, oh, everybody powwows. We don't. You know, Hopis don't generally powwow. There's a few of us like myself who are half that do. But there's other types of social dances. So we try to bring in representative groups to share their style of dance, and that was from the Hopi Nation. It was social dance.
Most amazing thing I've seen. So if you can imagine, there's the drummers and the singers in one area, and they're basically singing, but they're calling the buffalo. And then imagine there was 2 or 3 of them, and dressed in buffalo skins, and they came down dancing. It was the most surreal, cultural. It was amazing.
It really was, and I was so proud of the group that came. So what that is, again, like I said, we have our social dances. There's a time where the ladies in the Hopi culture can dance, with their male relatives, and they brought the Hopi buffalo dancers. It's a social dance, but again, there's a lot of ceremonial aspect to that, because they put on the buffalo headdresses, and those buffalo have spirits. And so then they brought him to a foreign land, and so they had to acknowledge that first they had to acknowledge your deities here, that were here not to cause any trouble, but then before they could dance that social dance at the powwow, they had to call the buffalo spirits into those headdresses after their flight overseas and everything. So that's what we did there at Ha'ola Village.
So what people see is maybe 20% of everything that goes into that. You also had, what I was amazed at was the singers from was it the Sioux? You really high voice.
Yeah, so that was a Northern Plains style of singing. The Southern Plains sing a little bit lower, but yeah, they were our host drum that year. Amazing. Yeah, that's a Northern style.
So I'm hoping when this whole vid thing goes away, we can powwow again.
Right.
And we'll again, Oahu Native
Nations Organization.
ONNO. Just remember ONNO.
ONNO 808 on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
You want to get other Native Americans you want to get in touch if you are Native American, comment down below. Get in touch with Dr. Lynnae Lawrence. Thank you so much for joining and sharing. We'll bring you on again soon, because learning about it is that's what we do. So if you're joining us on Culturised, thank you so much. Comment down below. Subscribe to us. Our website, culturised.com.